Well, welcome to the Many Hands of Bill Finger. I'm Alex Grand. I wrote Understanding Superhero Comic Books, and this panel started from a dinner with Athena last year where she said, "Did you know Bill Finger did more than just comic books?" And it started a whole thing, and I'm really glad she asked me that question. Here are our hosts. Each person, starting with Athena, introduce yourselves and your relationship to Bill Finger or his material.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a great time this Saturday morning. I'm Athena Finger, the granddaughter of Bill Finger. This is the reason why we're here. Bill is an amazing storyteller, and this year is our 10-year anniversary of him getting credit.
I'm Bill Field. I co-wrote this book, the Neil Adams Master Illustrator, with my good friend Alex over here. I learned a lot about Bill Finger when we were working on the book, and then I met Athena. Well, I met Athena 10 years ago.
It's actually been 11.
11 years, sorry. But I deep dived into Bill, and because of Athena, and I guess that's why I'm here.
Hi everyone, I'm Leonard Schwartz. How are you doing this morning?
Lady!
I'm a playwright, screenwriter, director. I wrote a play with Athena and her sister, Bill Finger Rides to the Bat. I also wrote a play about Steve Ditko. If you're around tomorrow, 11:15, the Ditko panel. Do not go to George Lucas. Anyway,
Shameless plug.
And I also, like I said, also direct film. And I met Athena 11 years ago. I literally bumped into her in the pavilion over there, and known her ever since. And we've had some adventures, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
We've had some adventures. But thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Evanier. I'm on this panel because I'm on all the panels. This is my 10th one of the convention. I've got 8 more to go after this. I'm here because I love Bill Finger's work, and I got to tell him so. I got to meet Bill. I will tell the story, I'm sure, before we're out of here. And I told him how much he had influenced me. I told him, I like a lot of people, I've stolen a lot of ideas from you, so I just but I'll confess to it. And I spent a lot of time championing his cause. I was actually a consultant to the Bob Kane estate at one point. I actually knew Bob Kane very well too, and I didn't hate him quite as much as some people do. But we'll talk about that, sure. Anyway, thank you.
So, as we know, Bill Finger co-created Batman, published for Detective Comics in 1939. Bob Kane brought the name to DC, and it needed work. So, Athena, why don't you tell us about the creation of Batman and what Bill Finger did?
So, as I know it, because of course I wasn't there, so Bill and Bob had already had some kind of working relationship with some of the comic strips that Bob was working on. And so in the afterwave of Superman coming out, they wanted to come out with another superhero. And so Bob Kane said that he could do that, but wasn't very exciting with his image. We kind of have a sketch over there with the red and the big stiff wings and the blonde hair and stuff. So Bill was already writing for him, so he knew that he needed to hash out a story before he went back to National. And so Bill was not quite excited about his image and started making changes. So if you see the Batman that is on the left-hand side there, that was more influenced by Bill playing with language. If you're going to call him a bat, he should probably look a little more like a bat. He needs to be able to move around, so let's change these wings and things like that. So it kind of just took off from there. As I've been told, he swiped the first story because he had a weekend to write it, so he borrowed some material, and that was the beginning.
Right, and that's from The Shadow, right, that he got that. Mm-hmm. And then I think Bob Kane swiped poses from like newspaper strips, so it was kind of a hodgepodge of things. But Bill Finger
3
made
days to get it all worked out.
3 days to do it. So everything we think about as far as Batman comes from Bill Finger's ideas. He had a lot of ideas, a notebook, always putting ideas down. Eventually in the 60s, and and Mark Evanier can probably attest to this stuff, is in the 60s, Bill Finger starts to get more recognition. There's newspaper articles out there that kept putting out that he was the guy, the writer behind it, even though, Bob Kane had the byline. And, it's just these random clips that, I found on newspapers.com where they were giving Bill Finger credit, but it wasn't in any way official. Mark, can you test in meeting Bill Finger around this time and how fandom started to get to know who he was?
Well, the first time I was aware of Bill Finger, there was a man named Jerry Bales, who was one of the founders of comic fandom, and he published a couple of fanzines. And in one of them, he said, Bill Finger created it was much the creator of Batman as Bob was, or something words to that effect. And the next thing, his next issue was fanzine, he printed a letter from Bob Kane, which was probably ghosted. And it denied, it's like, Bill Finger did not create Batman, I created. Well, Bob took a position that was not truthful, but it was what his lawyer would have told him to say if Bob wanted to wring every possible nickel out of DC Comics. And one of the advantages, but there's a lot of things, bad you can say about Bob Kane, but he was a better businessman than a lot of, if all you cared about was making money, he was a better businessman than most people in comics, a shrewder one. He had lawyers in his family, and he had signed a deal in the 40s with DC. It was a much better deal than anyone else got for Batman. And part of the reason he got it was that Siegel and Schuster were threatening DC, and DC couldn't fight over both characters at the same time. So they gave Bob what he wanted at the time, which was enough money where he didn't have to work. And but it started getting around, and I started reading in fanzines about this Bill Finger guy, and Bob's denials didn't make sense. His attitude was, hey, the byline on Batman says by Bob Kane. If Bill Finger had created Batman or any part of it, it would say by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. It doesn't. Well, it didn't, because he made a deal that said it wouldn't. And around 1968, I got to meet Bob Kane. I actually spent a couple of days with him. He was out in L.A. working on a TV pilot that never sold, starring Lloyd Bridges as a Western called The Silent Gun. And I got to spend some time with Bob. And more importantly, Bob got to spend some time while I was there with vodka. And he started opening up and telling me stories that were not for print, but most of them were about how much he hated every single person at DC Comics and how they were all crooked and awful and evil people, and they mistreated him too because he should have gotten more money than he did. And I knew Bob. I was one of only 4 people in the comic book world who showed up at Bob Kane's funeral. It was me, Stan Lee, Mike Barr, and Paul Smith. And Bob was so distant from the comic book business at that time that all his friends who were there went, oh, the comic book industry sent a delegation to honor Bob. And no, we didn't. We just came because we felt we should. Stan was an invited speaker. And, and when they buried Bob, as the funeral went on, there was an open coffin. I don't like open coffins. But the last time I saw Bob Kane, he was the way a lot of people wanted to see him, dead. and as everybody filed out, you file out past the coffin in a funeral. I took a detour, so I didn't have to, but everybody else who was there had a small Batman toy to put in the coffin with Bob. They're putting Batmobiles and Batarangs and Batcopters and Bat this and that. No comic books, nothing Bob had allegedly drawn. Batman merchandise that other people had designed. And I thought, oh, well, this is kind of appropriate. And I began getting madder and madder at the fact that Bill Finger, who I met once at DC Comics, seemed like a very nice man and a guy who was working very hard at that time, just trying to support himself. Bill Finger should not have had to work hard to support himself. DC should have paid him money just for being Bill Finger and for all he'd done that they could build on. Look at all the things that were just merchandise based on Bill Finger ideas and designs that would never have been done if Bill Finger hadn't said to Jerry Robinson, hey, here's the villain who looks like this, or here's an idea for something. He had a very, very strong hand in building that intellectual property. And I spent a lot of time trying to convince Bob's widow to let Bill's name be put on it. I almost convinced her a couple of times. And I'm talking too much, so I'll stop there.
Right. But you met Bill Finger, right, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us about that.
I was up at the D.C. offices. This would have been, Bill died in 74, was it? Or,
Yeah,
This would have been about 73. I was up at the D.C. offices poaching because I was there as, I was working for Jack Kirby at the time, and so that opened the doors for me to go to D.C. and it also opened the doors for me to visit Marvel. It opened the doors for me to visit Steve Ditko at that time. And there was a man named Nelson Bridwell who worked for DC, who was a brilliant writer and a guy who knew everything about everybody. And I saw this older man walking around. And in the halls of DC, I had met Neil Adams, I had met Robert Kanigher, and I had met Carmen Santino and Gil Kane and all these people. But I didn't know who this guy was. And I saw him walking around, and I said to Nelson, "Who's that?" And he said, "Oh, that's Bill Finger." Bill Finger, and then I went looking for him, and he was gone. I go, "Oh, damn, I missed my chance to meet Bill Finger." And about an hour later, I was leaving D.C. to go over to Marvel, and in the lobby at the D.C. building, there was a little newsstand place that sold people cigarettes and candy and stuff like that, and Bill Finger was coming out of it. So I went up to him, and I introduced myself, and I said, "I've stolen a lot of ideas from you, sir, but you're one of my favorite writers." And we had a very nice conversation about the subway system in New York. We didn't talk anywhere near as much about comics as I would have liked. I would have liked to have sat him down and, fed him a lot of food and maybe given him some of Bob's vodka and, heard from him. But that was it. It was about 7 minutes maybe I had with Bill. And I hope I sit down with him again and get to meet him again. And you couldn't. So,
yeah, that's great. Thank you. And of course we associate him with Batman, but he did other things too. He co-created with Mark Nodell in 1940 the original Green Lantern, Alan Scott. So that was another creation of his. And so, Bill, tell us about the Alan Scott, the Golden Age Green Lantern, the lore that Bill Finger helped create.
Green Lantern was basically based on a lot of things, to the Lensman and a lot of the early, like almost Penny Dreadful kind of things. But it was a time where Flash Comics was coming out, and they needed some more heroes to throw in there. They went to Bill, they went to Mark, and they just kind of came up with something again within just a few days. And look at us 85 years later. I mean, it still is reticent, and Green Lantern is arguably one of the top 5 DC characters. So this guy was so talented that he could almost just think this stuff up in his sleep, I think. I mean, he was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean,
he was a storyteller and he was passionate about
extremely prolific,
having interesting characters to work with.
Right, and Green Lantern was a big part of that. So, and Wildcat was a boxer who basically wanted to kick people's butts when he wasn't boxing. That became pretty much a consistent trope of Bill's, is people righting wrongs when people have been killed, or people like a train blows up and creates the Green Lantern. And I think there's a death in the ring with Wildcat, and he investigates it, and it became also probably one of the top 20 Golden Age characters. So, pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill Finger is credited for the first, Marvel characters team up for Timely in 1946. And there's a lot of, artists on it, but, when Stan was asked about it, he said it wasn't the type of title he'd have made up. So it's an interesting thing that Bill Finger has something to do with the story. And when you look at it, it's like they're all the characters are together, the Timely characters are talking to each other, they split up, and there's like a few sections of the team doing different things, and then it all comes together at the end. And it's an interesting story format. Like the all new X-Men had that same story format, and a lot of comics after that are team ups, they have that same story format. So first, Mark Evanier, is that right that this is the first Marvel team up? Is that a correct credit for him to have?
I don't know if it's the first Marvel team up, but it is one of the chance to spin off the whole idea of let's put all our characters in a book together. And if one superhero is great, two are fabulous, and people like seeing characters together. We all love team ups, crossovers, things like that. One of the things you have to keep in mind when you're looking at comic book history is that a lot of the writer credits that we now take for given are kind of educated guesses, because there were no credits on these, there were no records for the most part of these, and there are people who have figured out, Bill Finger used these phrases a lot, and these sound effects and whatever. There were certain traits that seem to identify certain people, but that doesn't it's not 100% guarantee. It's a very good strong. One of the things I did not know when I met Bill in the previous story I told was that he wrote the lead story of Superman story in Action Comics number 250. That's 2 issues before Supergirl debuted. It was a story called The Eye of Metropolis, and it was drawn by Wayne Boring, and it was the first superhero comic book I ever read. First one I ever had of that. Before that I had Disney comics and Bugs Bunny comics and such, but that was the first superhero comic I read. And as I look back on that story later, having become familiar with what we take to be Bill's work, or we know is Bill's work, I think, yeah, that's the same kind of story. It feels like a Bill Finger story, which of course I didn't recognize the first time I read it. I didn't know who Bill Finger was. Neither did most of the industry. But he worked every place he could work, and he worked some for Marvel. He worked for every company, and they knew the value of this man. He was not unknown within the business. He was known to be a guy who, even if they didn't know the full extent of his contribution to Batman, he did get his name on some of the other characters he did. He did in the, not to jump ahead of this narrative, but he did in the 50s, 60s, a lot of wonderful comics that he wrote that had nothing to do with Batman, because he was very, very, very fertile in his ability. He was very versatile. He wrote some funny stuff. He wrote some very serious stuff. He wrote a lot of romance comics, which had not, I think, been properly identified. But yeah, he helped Marvel into the idea, the concept of team superheroes.
Another thing about team-up comics like this, kids have always been economical. And if you get one comic with, 13 characters, as opposed to like a Batman or Superman comic, that was a big thing to kids. And not only that, but if you think about it and look at this, what group does this remind you of? Well, he also kind of created the Invaders, if you think about it, because they stole from a lot of these stories that Bill did. And so, again, you have Bill getting no credit, no nothing, and then the Invaders endured throughout the 70s into the 80s. So, this is a constant theme with Bill, don't you think?
Bill Finger story, there was always something that was well constructed, especially during that time period. If you look for the stuff we do know that Bill wrote, even like something like Detective Comics, like the very first one, he only had like a weekend. There is something that's very thought out. With a Bill Finger story, it's almost felt like it was almost more advanced in a certain regard. There was something more to it. There was more
Layers.
And I think that when you look at that and how it carried on through, like almost echoed through where we are today with comics, I mean, that is a foundation. And that is so cool.
It is. Yeah. He brought the storytelling forward, right?
Absolutely. He advanced it.
And how he approaches that.
Yeah.
He expands to other media, right? So different media have different ways of drawing out the same story in a different number of panels or a different number of TV sequences, camera work. So he could think story in different ways. So it wasn't just comic book, right? So he was also a writer on the Batman daily comic strip as well. And I think some of the challenges is trying to fit what you can in that daily and then still make it fresh for someone who just walked in on reading it that day, but also continuing the story for a loyal reader to keep them interested in a long form way. And so he had that down too. And that's not easy, right? Because you don't have 30 pages to tell that one story or 23 or whatever it is. It's panel work. And when you look at these, it almost seemed like, and I think maybe because he was writing for a newspaper strip and there was more adults and business people in Chicago reading that stuff, it's a little more grown-up version, and it feels like it's made for adults. So that's a lot of fun to read, and that's Bill there, it's hard to find pictures of him.
There aren't that many. He was very private.
He's private. Do you have a sense of like why he was private?
I think he was just consumed by the story.
Yeah.
And
100%.
I don't think he was really a flashy person. I think he was more just an introvert that wanted to tell a good story every time. A lot, I can't say most, a lot of creative people don't care about being put in the spotlight.
Right. That's right. And sometimes they'll partner with someone that loves the spotlight more than anything, right?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the duality, right? You need someone to be in that spotlight so that what you're creating can be out there to be consumed.
Yeah.
So, it's tricky because, of course, you want him to be out there and being recognized. But when you're busy doing your craft, you can't really be out in the spotlight.
And that kind of takes us to one of his co-creators who was kind of more the people person is Charles Sinclair. Charles was a radio announcer. The reason why he's important is he became Bill Finger's best friend, and they wrote for TV and film together. So you see their names together quite a lot, not in comics, but in a lot of other things. I learned about him from Jim Amash's interview in Alter Ego more than a decade ago, and it's got some great information, and Sinclair, his wit reads through when you just read it. But he met Bill in Greenwich Village in 1949. He was 10 years younger than Bill, so he was kind of this young go-getter with a great voice. His first real published work was with Bill Finger, and their first thing they did was for a radio show called the Nick Carter Master Detective Radio Show. He thought Bill was like street smart and shy with a lot of ideas. He had a notebook with ideas. If he thought of something random on the subway, he would write it down. He saved his ideas. He was really just would come alive with ideas all the time, just write them and use them for different things. And Sinclair was more the social guy. He could hobnob with like some upper crust guys that would then give them both work, but it was always through Sinclair as the guy. And you met Charles Sinclair.
I did. I had an opportunity to meet him about 10 years ago now. He was lovely. He actually gave me the one piece of art that Bill created.
Yeah.
The statue about this big of my grandmother. It's beautiful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
He was very gracious with his time, and he definitely cared about Bill and his well-being. They actually lived in the same building together, and they would continue to work as much as they were able to work together.
Well, one fun fact I found about Charles Sinclair, because he was an actor too, and I didn't realize this, he has an uncredited cameo in the 1994 Flintstones movie with John Goodman.
Now, the first work now, Nick Carter, the master detective. So I don't know if anyone knows about him, but he's a detective that precedes a lot of the detectives in pop culture. He goes back to like in the 1880s. In my book, Batman is in that detective sequence in the superhero for the evolving detective story. It starts with Nick Carter in a lot of ways. So I love that Bill Finger went back to that character. And if you look at it, he used a lot, and Charles Sinclair said this, he used a lot of the ideas he had in his notebook. And so you see like Batman-esque things in this story, which the words have been published, but he uses criminology, chemistry, geology, and it was an interesting like kind of pulpy story too. Like jade was smuggled into New York from China, right? Like it's almost like a 1930s pulp story, but and they evidently they split the writing fee, but this was like their gateway. This success was their gateway to television shows. So this was their first show that they did. It was called Foreign Intrigue, and there was a episode called The Crime Syndicate from 1953. This was credited to Charles Sinclair and Bill Finger, and it's really cool to see their names on the credits like that. And because he got more credits in TV than he did in the comics for the company that he made rich. So it was just an interesting thing to see his name, shining bright. But it's also cool, the storyline. It's very Cold War. There's like a kind of evil Russian guy going around, killing people. And they can't figure him out. They call him the Executioner. They just know he kills for Russia. And it's such a Batman-type story because the villain ended up being Conrad the Clown, which is like so Batman. Like that could be a Batman character, Conrad the Clown.
Well, not only that, but Conrad Velt.
Yeah.
Conrad in the name.
Yeah, it's perfect.
It's very, very, very joke.
Yeah, that's cool connection. I love that.
Yeah. A lot of the stuff that you watch, it's like so interesting to me because I think you said it feels like it could be a Batman story. But that being said, some of Bill's comic stories, they feel like they could just be another detective story. The 2022 Batman film with Robert Pattinson is that the only thing that's kind of weird is the Batman in it, really. And, when he's grounded, it could just be anything. It just could be a regular movie that you're watching.
Yeah.
With just a couple fantastical elements.
Right.
I think that's amazing.
And the episode really is filmed well. Like the cinematography is great. The way it ends, these weird camera angles. It feels like the director read comics and framed some of those shots, like especially the end where it shows that's on the bottom left, where you see from the floor above the bad guy was killed and he fell over the ledge, and there he is sprawled out, with the cops looking down at him, and you're looking at it from the floor he fell down on. It's just really a smart episode, and it's set in Paris, so it's very classy episode.
Yeah.
Then now Sinclair, is really Bill's bridge to Hollywood. So he was bureau chief for something called Television Digest, and he co-wrote this Warner Brothers film. Okay, and Lenny's seen it.
I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting film. Has anyone here seen the Jim Carrey film, The Majestic? Anyone have seen that? You can raise your hand. That's cool. That's it's kind of like that, but on acid. It really is. It's a weird British production, and but it does have this really. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it. Has anyone seen this movie?
Let's spoil this.
It says anyone.
I think we're in a safe window.
Oh, we're in a safe window.
And so it was through this that Sinclair got hooked up with Warner Brothers TV, and so he wrote season 4, episode 1 of a show called Lights Out. But through that connection, he started co-writing stuff with Bill for TV. One of the more esoteric things that Lenny and I were talking about earlier was for a New York-based TV series called The Web. It was a murder mystery. The episode Dear Sister starred Martha Scott. From this involvement, that then Sinclair would fly to L.A. to make deals while Bill Finger was in New York also working on other stuff.
The Web actually had people, not in Bill's episode, but it had Paul Newman, it had James Dean, it had people at the top of, before they became huge Hollywood stars, they were in this show. He's when he creates Batman, he's at the beginning of a new industry. He's one of the architects of that. And if you look at what Lights Out, or you look at The Web, or you look at, this is a time when I Love Lucy was on. This is the beginning of television. I find that so interesting with that,
And I don't think it's any coincidence that the first name of the actress in this is Martha.
Martha! That starts the Warner Brothers TV connection through a producer named Howie Horowitz. That was Sinclair's friend. And they ended up, through Howie, writing some episodes for 77 Sunset Strip. Wisecracking, private detectives, a little womanizing, but that's just how the show was.
And the young upstart.
Yeah.
Kooky, lend me your comb.
Right. Yeah. Snapper Car is based on, I think, the one on the right. But the 2 episodes that Bill was a part of were cool, especially the positive negative. It was a Nazi intrigue story, and it was initially a film script, and he put a lot of his ideas into this script for a movie, and then they ended up using it for this episode. So when you watch this episode, realize that it was a movie that Bill Finger wanted to make, and but it made it as this one episode, and he was keeping an eye on the news, anything that was relevant. There was a Nazi, that Adolf Eichmann, who escaped Nazi Germany, and they found him in Argentina, and there was something about the SS tattoo, and then how you could use infrared light to reveal a removed tattoo, and he used that as the way that the villain was uncovered in the episode, and it was just this cool thing. Again, it comes down to this detective scientific way of telling a story, and he throws that in. It's a very Bill Finger moment. And Mark Evanier, did you watch 77 Sunset Strip? Was it something that was in your radar? Yeah.
Thank you, Snapper Evanier.
all these guys were watching TV a lot and getting stuff from each other, and an awful lot of things that turned up on, Twilight Zone turned up in Amazing Adult Fantasy a couple months later, and things like that. All these people, and it's interesting. There was a strange connection between Howie Horvitz and comic books, because Howie Horvitz's favorite writer was a man named David Verne, who wrote a lot of comic books. And David Verne was actually one of the few bi-coastal comic book people. He was in New York a lot. He was in LA a lot. When he was in LA a lot, he wrote a lot of episodes of the Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers had all these different TV shows, Surfside 6 and Hawaii and I and Roaring Twenties and all these things. And 77 Cent Strip was the most successful one for there, and the plots on it often popped up on each other, and they popped up in comic books. It was all going back and forth all the time. And David Verne's best friend, when he was going back and forth, was a man named Alan Sherman, who you may remember wrote My Son the Folk Singer. He was a very famous comedy parody writer. And Alan Sherman produced some game shows that David Verne wrote on, and then David Verne got Alan Sherman into writing some stuff for Howie Horvitz. And at some point, if this had gone on long enough, Alan Sherman would have wound up writing for Julia Schwartz Comics in New York, I think. Mm-hmm. So Finger got into that little group of people there, and probably could have done more work for LA if he'd been out here more. Mm-hmm. Out here being up there, yes. I forgot where I am right now.
The 77 Sunset Strip, it had actors that show up later that have something to do with it. And like Adam West was in an episode, and he was investigated in the show plot. It's in the episode called Thanks for Tomorrow, and his scene, you could watch that scene on YouTube. I mean, he's like young and pretty fresh here. I mean, this is before Batman, like by some years. But it's cool to see that, people were, in it, that the stew was there to make Batman 66. And that takes us to Lorenzo Semple Jr. He was a story editor on 77 Sunset Strip. And it's funny, Charles Sinclair in that interview I referred to called him the Bob Kane of TV script editors. He would assign his own scripts for shows while also bottlenecking other writers' stuff from getting in. So he hated this idea that Howie Horowitz was bringing in scripts from New York, like kind of circumventing him. And he hated that idea of it. And so he really limited, if he could, Charles and Bill Finger's, contributions to TV. He was approached by Bill Dozier to make Batman 66 for Fox. And he wrote the pilot, the first 4 episodes, and the feature film. And Howie Horowitz left Warner Brothers for 20th Century Fox and was part of Batman, and he brought in Finger and Sinclair to contribute to it. And this is a letter that Bill writes to Howie Horowitz about this episode for the TV show. And what's cool about it is, I don't know if it was an accident, but he calls Bob Kane like repeatedly.
I don't think it was an accident.
But there was very much this stuff going on with Bob Kane, also trying to kind of passive aggressively slow down what they were doing for the TV show. I don't think he really wanted, have Bill Finger part of that. And so there's this frustrated letter from Bill, which I don't know if he talked the way he wrote, but the way he writes here is really incisive and observant and diplomatic, and you see a lot of layers in this letter. He was a really smart guy. Like, the way he wrote was smooth, and he's basically saying, look, the script's there. It was delayed by Bob Kane, and but it's on the way. It's for the Clock King. So he created the Clock King. He had actor Robert Morley in mind, and it ended up being portrayed by Walter Slezak. And this was the episode where Bill Finger and Charles Sinclair get credit. And Charles said, hey, Bill, we put Bill's name first on that because first he did a lot of the work, but also it meant a lot to him to have his name first. And he didn't ask for it, but Charles did it out of kindness, and Bill lit up like crazy when he did that for him. And so I think that meant a lot to him to finally see his name with Batman. And this is the episode where Sammy Davis Jr. is cameoed on the wall. They randomly added that to the story. When they were writing the script and he would write a line, Bill would say, well, Batman would never say that. Like that was always his. Well, Batman would more say it like this, or like he really was connected with who Batman was, and he was very picky about the script. Like, no, Batman would say it like this. Batman would not say it like that. Like he would be very passionate about that, and I thought that was pretty cool. Athena, tell us about how that feels. Seeing his name up there, the TV show, your awareness of that TV show.
Well, it's like you said, it's the only time that Bill got to see his name attached to the character that he molded and morphed into what we have now. So I think that, when Charles was telling me about the decision to put Bill's name first, and if you see the documentary, you can see this also, and he wanted to make sure that Bill had the experience of actually seeing his name attached to it. So he did the whole private screening and color TV and the whole bit for him. So he really got to enjoy that high moment of being the shining star. I think that's really important that Charles gave him that opportunity.
And Lenny, tell us about your impression of this episode. I know you've seen it a bunch of times.
I love the Batman '66 TV show. Everything about it is just awesome. I mean, to me it's I remember being like 7 years old and it come on at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and just I didn't know at the time who Bill Finger was, but as a kid I ate this up. I remember the Batman movie came out and I was like watching this over and over again. I remember this episode. It was fun. I liked it.
Yeah, it's fun.
A lot of fun.
And Walter Slezak was wonderful in this. I mean, he was really, yeah. Weren't his henchmen Tick and Tock?
Yeah, Semple Jr. kind of limits, more scripts from them, and so he takes other jobs. And one of them was for the Army Pictorial Center, and I can't find any footage of that, but I found some footage of kind of that era that when he was on it. He wrote for the Why We Fight series. This was based out of Long Island, so he was physically close to it. He could go there for military men and women. He was actually employed by the government at this time. He would write like how to interrogate a prisoner, which Bill knows how to do, and how to how to. And so he was there for 3 to 4 years. He worked with technical advisors, and he would essentially translate the techniques of all these things into screenplays for education. And so that was in the later 60s. So let's talk about his Hollywood movies, because there were some. But he did something called Snow Devils. As there were spaghetti westerns, there was also spaghetti sci-fi films where they're filmed in Italy, and then they come out, in America, dubbed a couple years later. This one came to the USA in 1967. It's about Commander Rod Jackson investigates a Himalayan weather station wiped out by hulking, icy blue aliens. And they're from the planet Aten, and they plan to freeze Earth with a climate control device. And thank goodness for all of us, Jackson destroys the machine. But yeah, and again, this is that's Bill Finger and Charles Sinclair doing some interesting stuff, and this one is like kind of the big one, The Green Slime, 1968, and this one was actually very well budgeted. It was an MGM Toei Japan co-production, so as American actors, but the film crew was Japanese.
I saw this in the theater growing up in Hawaii when I believe I was 7 years old, 1970, and of course it scared the hell out of me as a kid. Don't rewatch things years later that scare you, because you'll be like, how the hell did that scare me? But it was good. Richard Jekyll was great in it. It's a really, it's a pretty good movie, even with the silliness, but I don't know, it's almost like, because of the Japanese element, it's almost like a Godzilla movie without Godzilla. And we know how exciting that is. But
and this was directed by Kinji Fukasaku. Astronauts return from a space mission with an alien green slime creature. And I know, and Lenny kind of binged on some of this guy's work.
Gosh, I'm a huge Kinji Fukasaku fan. Is anyone a Kinji Fukasaku fan here? Guys are awesome. The rest of you need to see a Kinji Fukasaku film before next Comic-Con. You won't be allowed in.
Can you say that 10 times fast?
I can if you want, but we'll do it after the film.
Okay, after the film. Okay, good.
Because after this film, you watch it, and once you go on to do afterwards, he does Tour. Has anyone seen that film? Unbelievable. That's a movie he did after. And he then after that, he did a film that was known in the West as the Yakuza Papers. The Yakuza Papers is amazing. If you've never seen that film, please go see that. That is incredible. One of the things that would be so great to do is to give Bill Finger a Hollywood star in the Walk of Fame.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I really do believe that. And we can do that in this room, actually. I think that we need to start doing that.
And there is a GoFundMe for that.
There is a GoFundMe for that. And that needs to be pushed very heavily because, yeah, sure, he did all these things I just spoke about. But again, we can this is a panel about things he did besides Batman. But this convention, I said it before, it's the same thing. It's DNA. You don't walk 10 feet without seeing someone with a Batman, like a Batman. That's how I do here. Yep.
Something interesting about these movies that he did is I found a poster with his credit on there, and he called himself William Finger in these. So even though his name is Milton Finger. But William Finger seems like a movie pen name that he did, and because it shows up in a couple different places as William. So maybe this was like his movie alias or something.
Possibly. I really don't know why he switched his name around. I was always a little confused about that, but yeah, I mean, I guess if you're gonna have a pen name and you want to have a different name in Hollywood.
Yeah, in Hollywood. Right?
Confused with Milton Berle.
Yeah. Bill Finger died, I think, of a heart attack in his apartment and by himself. So no one knew where he was, and it was Charles Sinclair, his best friend, who discovered him. And he told you that story, right, Athena? Why don't you tell us that?
He told me that I had mentioned they lived in the same building towards the end of Bill's life. And since they were best friends, they would speak regularly. And Charles was a little concerned that he hadn't heard from Bill for a couple days, so he took his spare key and went downstairs to check on him. And unfortunately, he was sound asleep, he thought, on the couch until he touched him and realized that he had passed over the weekend. And yeah, it's a little sad.
Yeah, it's and I didn't realize it was him that found him too. And 2 years after that death, this movie comes out called The Track of the Moon Beast. 76. It almost reads like a DC comic that I could imagine reading. A meteorite lodges into a man's brain, flies from space, lands right into his brain. It turns him into, but it turns him into a were-lizard, and it's a cool thing. And then learning he will explode soon, he runs away and explodes. And it's I don't know. I like it. This is fun stuff. I want more of that, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Sinclair said there were 2 more movies that we can't find. Some other spaghetti sci-fi stuff that he may have contributed to that we don't really know. That's like where I think that answer may lie, but I don't know.
Again, it scared the hell out of me.
Well, my proudest moment was working with the Ditko's attorney on finding a way for him to get them a good settlement from Marvel, because he had me go over like 200 documents, and he says, I don't know how I'm going to approach this. And I said, look, you want to use their depositions against them, and we found some where they say that Stan didn't give any ideas to Ditko after a certain point. And I said, go after those characters then, because that fails the model for instance and expense. And he was like, okay, that's brilliant. That's what I'm going to do. And I was on the phone with Mark Tobroff for like 3 months, and that was my proudest moment.
Thank you, Alex.